country. I call the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Mr. Speaker, the National Party has again been found out. They've been found out to be inept, incompetent, incapable and politically impoverished. This is a very, very difficult time for the National Party that got itself back into power, promising of all things a brighter future. What they forgot to mention, of course, was that the brighter future was for their mates, whether they be domestic or foreign. But for the rest of us, this debate today is about the National Parties being found out to be the very thing that they claim not to be, and that is incompetent. To be not what they claim to be, that is, they claim to be great managers of business and of assets. Why they'd make that claim given their track record, I wouldn't know. But that's what they said they were going to do, and it's the reason why so many who should be part of this debate today have decided that they would be, I can't say this, can I? They would be where they can't, or they decided to be where they could ignore the subject of the debate. I can say that. They decided to make sure that they could ignore the subject of this debate in the House today. The sale of state assets has been a fiasco from beginning to end. On every dimension possible, the process has been totally flawed. And at each time, surely, around this country, there are more and more voices saying, but why would they do that? When all the fiscals, all the economics, all the timing, everything suggested don't do this, they kept on saying they're going to do it. Which begs the question, who's pulling the strings behind the National Party? Forget the backbench over there. We all know that the backbench over there are cannon fodder, and they demonstrate it every day. But who's calling the strings, pulling the strings, calling the policy behind the National Party? These assets are valuable and making good returns to all New Zealanders. Forget the man from Epsom who was so proud of his campaign that he was seen pulling down his hoardings. It's the first time in the history of Western democracy that a candidate has been seen not putting his hoardings up, but pulling them down weeks before the vote. So let's not hear any more from the man from Epsom, because he categorises just what's wrong with the once proud party. That so many men and women, who I think their mothers probably still loved them, taught them to have character and decency and integrity, have been so beguiled by the chance of one day maybe being a minister to be behaving in this obsequious, toady way. Now, the man from Epsom knows that. He says, he recognised that instantly. Already groups of New Zealanders are being set against each other on the basis of racial entitlement. They are being set against each other around this country. The National Party is setting New Zealander against New Zealander all over New Zealand. You've got Maori versus Maori on this issue, because make no bones about it, the next lot of claims will be, well, if we own the water, then which of us owns the water? There comes the next volume of claims before the Maori Land Court, all the way on to higher courts. Then you've got Maori versus the rest of New Zealand. Most of the rest of New Zealand is utterly confused as to what is going on here, because their great Prime Minister, the man that has a bit of trouble with his diction and the Americans can't understand, their man said that the water was owned by nobody, that no one owned the water. In the very next breath, of course, he purported to sell it. And then you've got the wealthy versus the rest of New Zealand, and you've got the foreigner who will get it, according to Treasury, within 10 years against the rest of New Zealand as well. Do you remember the foreshore and seabed, which happily was resolved by the government of 2004? No, it wasn't. Which didn't have one Maori tribe on the coast, Mr. Finlayson. No. Not one coastal tribe, 2005 to 2008, would go public and oppose that legislation. And with the greatest respect, Mr. Finlayson, you know nothing about the coastal tribes. You're flashing along as the great new white hope of the radical Maori. It doesn't entitle you to understand the subject. And as someone whose family has lived on the coast for 1,000 years, I might know a little bit more about it than you. That's for certain. Pardon? Unbelievable. There he was, of course, acting for Maori before he got the job. Then all of a sudden he's the new Maori friend. Look, I've seen a procession of men like you, Mr. Finnison. One was Doug Graham. He used to weep here and cry every night upon all these settlements. The very man who came from a party who promised to have a meaning to the word national that meant all of us. And who was it that campaigned on Kiwi, not Iwi? Which party did that? Which party predicated its whole recovery on the basis of Kiwi, not Iwi? And what was the issue that they campaigned on? They said the foreshore and seabed was divisive in terms of the legislation. Mr. Finnison surely remembers that, given his claims to high jurisprudential memory. Surely he can remember just a few weeks ago. Just a few weeks ago, years ago, he can remember that. Oh, yes, it was. Kiwi, not Iwi. All around the country. Did you hear a man from the Wellington legal fraternity, Mr. Finnison, saying this is wrong? We can't possibly say that because the coastal tribes are against it? Not a word then. Not a mutter, not a murmur, not a syllable, not a sound. And yet hardly was the election over in 2008. Round the back room with the National Party and did a secret deal with the Maori Party, and now we've got a new foreshore and seabed set of legislative rules and already 27 claims. Right. Already 27 claims. Mr. Finnison for the National Party says, great. What happened to national unity? What happened to New Zealand against the world? What happened to racial fairness? What happened to us striving to be what we are, regardless of our background, regardless of our race? Well, under the National Party, that is just a plethora of promises, because today, division and separatism is what their policies stand for, and at the next election, no, you can shake his head, because you see, it's one thing to go around and skulk around the coffee bars of Wellington. It's something else to get out there amongst the real people. And there are the mass majority of the mass... Yes, that's all he's done. But out there, the mass majority of Maori and the overwhelming majority of the rest of the population are going to find out just how bad that legislation is. Of course, this is Mr. Finnison, of course, on this issue of separatism, who thinks that a new constitution by a specially hand-picked group of people with the Treaty of Waitangi as its cornerstone is a good thing for our country. Even though the greatest Maori there ever was in this parliament, Ngata, warned against such a thing, Mr. Finnison, of course, knows better. Because somehow, I don't know how he got that, if he acquired a greater knowledge of both the Maori and the European and everybody else in the law, and he thinks that a divisive constitution based on separatist interests is sound. And if that's not bad enough, it's got a lot to do with this, because it stands on all fours. Then there's whānau ora, social development, delivery differently, and now we've got water. And what used to be something that we thought was a gift from God, or if we were atheists, a gift from nature, is now a gift from who? Mr. Finnison and the junk bond dealer, the guy that does the deal within an hour, moves on, if you can, Mr. Spray and walk away. It's a deal between him and Mr. Finnison, but it's no longer what belongs to everybody in this country, no matter how long they've been here or how recent they arrived. So one of the great characteristics of being a New Zealander is what the National Party is prepared to trade away. Instead of prioritising the things that matter to Maori, like housing, like education, like a decent health system, like first world wages and employment in their own country, no. Off they went and did a deal with all the radical Maori fellow travellers, in bed with them, and they think that the average majority of New Zealanders out there are going to swallow that. No, they will not. And our job is to go out and to ensure that they aren't willfully, blindly ignored by the National Party in the ensuing months. It has been a total fiasco. And a cabinet paper warned them about that. But I want to know this. Why was the National Party so stupid is to take this issue after the foreshore and seabed from where it was, where we all learned it, regardless of our background, and now we're going to have people owning it on the basis of race. How can that possibly be where our country wants to go in the 21st century? And so if you're out there and you were a National Party supporter, my advice to you now is, I know you're desperately worrying about what your party's doing. But don't give up. Don't stop being involved in democracy. Hang on, because help's on its way, and vote New Zealand First in 2014.
Order. The next 4 calls are 5-minute calls. Honourable Chris Finlayson. Right.
Well, I only need 5-minute calls. 5-minute call.